Welcome to the NCDWI Guide podcast, where defenders of the Constitution assemble to prepare for courtroom battle and firm owners gather to develop marketing strategies that will revolutionize the practice of criminal defense. Here's your host, the NCDWI guy, Jake Minnick.
Hello, fellow freedom fighters, and welcome to episode 116 of the NCDWI Guy podcast. On today's episode, we are talking about the importance of field notes, the importance of narratives, officer narratives, when it comes to your cross-examination and preparation for a DWI trial. When you think about a officer's investigation, when you think about what happened at the time that your client was arrested, there are kind of three state stories that get told about what happened. Obviously, your client is going to tell you everything from their perspective of what happened regarding the case, but there are kind of three state stories to be told about what happened during the investigation. The first is the officer or officers' reports. Anything that is written down, typed, handwritten, short form, whatever it might be, anything that is on paper tells the story about what happened at the time of the arrest. Second, you have video evidence, body camera, dash camera, you're receiving that from the state. That can sometimes tell a very different story than what you're seeing on the notes, sometimes for the better for your client, sometimes for the worse for your client. And then finally, the third story that gets told by the state about what happened at the roadside is what the officer says in the courtroom. So you got to understand that these can be very different stories. They can be very different. What is said in the notes may not be what comes out in terms of what happens on the stand, the officer's testimony. What happens on video may not be confirmed by what happens or what is written down in the report. So just understand there's three very different stories that are out there. And the reason why I say that is that most of the time when I was starting in practice, if I got a report and it said bad driving, slurred speech, red glassy eyes, 4 out of 6 on HGN, 5 out of 8 on the walk and turn, 3 out of 4 on the one leg stand, 2 positives on the PBT, admission of drinking. You see that on a report and you think there's no way to challenge this. There's no way to attack this charge. They've got my client dead to rights. Then something in the video or a lot in the video would say, well, that's actually not kind of what the report indicates. That's very much kind of contradicting what has been written in the report. Doesn't appear that the instructions were given correctly. I don't see these clues that the officer has indicated. The person's speech sounds fine. So watching the video very much is important, regardless of what happens in the report. When it came to, let's say there is no video, report was bad. My client would want, say, look, I want to take this case to trial. My job depends on this, okay, fine. But it doesn't seem like there's anything in the report to challenge. Then the officer gets on the stand and starts testifying about what they saw, what the investigation looked like, how they did field sobriety tests, the clues that they were looking for. And it's like, oh my gosh, this person really had no idea what they were doing when they did this investigation. They weren't even certified in field sobriety testing when they did the 3 standardized field sobriety tests. They didn't give the instructions correctly. They can't articulate on the stand what the clues are that they are looking for, despite the fact that they saw 3 out of 8 on the walk and turn. They're saying clues that aren't actually even clues on the stand. So again, very different. And sometimes worse testimony comes out on the stand than is in the report. Sometimes better testimony or problematic testimony from the state's perspective comes out. Again, sometimes the video is contradicting either or both of the report and the testimony that's coming out through the officer. But the important thing to know is this, and it is very important when you're getting into the trial mindset. A bad report doesn't mean that you have a bad case to take to trial. I'll say that again. A bad report does not mean that you have a bad case to take to trial. There are 3 stories from the state's perspective of what happened. One is the notes, including, written reports, narrative, all of that. One is the video evidence that you receive from the state. And then finally, what the officer testifies happened when they get onto the stand, sometimes being refreshed by notes, sometimes adding to that, whatever it might be. So just understand there's 3 stories to be told. Officers need to understand and should understand the importance of effective note taking. And what we're really going to talk about today is locking officers into the report. Because what do you not like when you take a case to trial? What is most of our greatest fear when we take a case to trial? It's the unknown. We don't want to look stupid. We don't want to look foolish. We don't want to know like we don't want to look like we don't know what we're talking about. And so unknowns are a real problem for any case going to trial. A lawyer, regardless of what area of law they practice, doesn't want to have unknown questions. They don't want to have question marks out there about what's going to come out in testimony. So the way to avoid that on a criminal case is to lock the officer into the notes that they've written, to lock the officer into the report that they have completed regarding your client's case. And this is actually very simple. It's very simple to do this, but you don't want anything regarding impairment coming out that is not written in the officer's report at trial. You don't want any unknowns coming out at trial, things that make your client's case more problematic. If possible, you want to avoid those things coming out at trial. So that's what we're mostly going to be focusing in on today, is how to make that happen. Officers are trained to do thorough, detailed, complete, accurate reports. They're trained that way. And this is something that I feel like if I were in charge of running a police academy, which is not a job I'm applying for anytime soon, but if I were applying for a police academy, one of the top things that I would emphasize to police officers is do a good job, do a thorough job with your reports. The value of that really can't be understated in terms of the state's position. When the state has an officer that does a good job with their notes, that does a detailed and accurate representation of what was happening at the roadside, it becomes much more difficult for a defendant to successfully take a case to trial, to get a not guilty. If the state has outlined what the elements of the charge are in that report, it's easy to communicate to the defense, hey, this is a case that we've got your client dead to rights. So it helps in terms of forcing our hand when it comes to advising our client about the possibility of taking the case to trial or what our strategy is going to be. And then it also helps keep maintain the officer's credibility, as well as prove the state's case when there's a detailed report that is underlying the officer that is testifying. So it's so important. And so I am going to be jumping back and forth today between the NHTSA manual, the 2018 NHTSA student manual, student training manual, and then the BLET basic law enforcement training student manual. So I'm going to start off here, and this is basically restating what I've just said, but it's funny because it's in the BLET manual. Here's a quote on page 40 of the basic law enforcement training section, field note taking and report writing. This is a 12-hour block, 12 hours, field note taking and report writing, 12-hour block that officers are doing in BLET training. 12-hour block. That is a substantial amount of time that is getting devoted to the importance of field note taking and report writing. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute, but this is just a couple of things to kind of kick things off. This is from page 40. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. That is from the BLET manual. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. At the conclusion of this section, this from page 43, it does not matter how effective your investigation is if it is not reported completely, accurately, and understandably. A poorly written report is no better than a poor investigation. You are judged by what you write. This would be something that I would say, but this is again in the manual of the police and the BLET training student manual. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. And that is what we're going to be kind of emphasizing today and how to communicate that. So when you have a cross-examination, again, you don't want surprises. If you've received a written report from an officer, you want to know how that officer is going to testify. And there may be some harmful things in that report, but you certainly don't want additional harmful things coming out in testimony. So here is how we want to lock a officer into their report when they are testifying. You start by talking about what types of training, maybe this has already come out in direct examination, but what types of training have you gone through related to investigation of crimes or DWI? Most officers, almost all officers in North Carolina are going to have gone through BLET. Officers that are investigating impaired driving cases on a regular basis, most of them will have gone through the 24-hour NHTSA student course. So hopefully they talk about one or both of those things. If they haven't, then that's a problematic sign in terms of lack of training. But hopefully they've done both. If they haven't done the NHTSA training, likely they've at least done BLET. And so you say, well, did you discuss during your NHTSA student training or during your BLET training? And again, I'll give citations to both of these as we go through the episode today. But didn't you receive training on the importance of taking accurate, complete, and detailed notes? Didn't you receive training directly on that subject? Yes is the only correct answer because they did. So yes. Did you write a complete and accurate report in this case? Yes. Did you leave anything out of that report? No. Right? Because they want to follow the training. The officer on the stand wants to have followed their training. So as soon as you lock them in and say you've done a complete and accurate report in this case, yes. Did you leave anything out? No, I didn't leave anything out that was relevant. Now you've locked in what happened on the date of investigation in terms of bad facts for your client into the officer's report. It's a no-win situation for the officer sitting in the stand if they have not done a complete and accurate report. If they didn't put slurred speech into the report, but they're saying it from the stand, then it's a problem for them because they've just said, well, I was trained to write a detailed and accurate report. I didn't put anything about slurred speech in the report, when I wrote it 6 hours after the event happened, 6 hours after my arrest of Mr. Jones. But now here we are 8 months later, I'm sitting on the stand. And yes, I do remember that he had slurred speech. It doesn't make sense. And that's why it doesn't make sense, because if it wasn't important enough to write down the date of the charge, it's not important to remember now. So that's why it's inconsistent. But again, it's all about locking the officer into that report. Are you trained to take detailed and accurate notes? Yes. Did you take detailed and accurate notes in this case? Yes. Did you leave anything important out of your report as far as you remember? No, I didn't. You've now locked them in on that position. So if you have any any kind of wiggling on that front in terms of, well, yeah, and I'm trained to take notes, or I do remember that we did some sort of a training about, importance of note taking, but specifically, I don't recall that. I don't know what the training was. If you need to lock the officer further in, we're going to go through today some of the details on the importance of this from both the NHTSA manual and from BLET. And so one thing that I would just suggest is, we've talked about this on a couple of episodes now, the episode 51, what does it mean for a test to be standardized? We kind of talked about some of the nuances in some of the lesser known sections of the NHTSA manual. This is another one of those moments. Session 12 of the NHTSA student handbook, or I think it's now called participant manual, is about prosecuting the arrested subject and preparation for trial. So this is the officer's go by in terms of how to prepare for trial, how to do note taking, how to testify, what they should say. Read this section. You may find something that is just a golden nugget from this section. It has so much powerful information. Officers certainly should be regularly reviewing this, because there's a ton of absolutely golden ideas in this section in terms of how to testify, how to prepare your case for trial. I feel like there's so few officers that do any trial preparation. They'll sit in the courtroom for 6 hours waiting for their case to get called. And, maybe they look at the report once or talk to the DA for 3 minutes, and that's the trial preparation. It's like, you've been sitting here for 6 hours and, you could have been, getting ready. And obviously that's helpful from the defense perspective. But this has got real gems, but it also has real gems for the defense in terms of things that you can use during cross-examination to say, you're trained to do this. Why didn't you? Right. So that's the value of this. So this is not something that I think gets a lot of time emphasized on. If you have not taken a NHTSA 24-hour student course and you're handling DWI cases, you need to sign up for one immediately. That's what I'll say on that front. Call me and I'll be happy to recommend some places to get that done. So session 12, page 7. This is the language from the 2018 NHTSA student manual. No matter how much evidence you collect, if it is not presented clearly, completely, and convincingly in court, the case may be lost. Therefore, it is essential officers develop the ability to write a clear, complete, and concise report describing their observations and results. Additionally, the officer must be able to articulate that information to the judge or jury. Clear, complete, and concise report. Session 12, page 7. Flipping over a couple of pages, I'm just reading some of this great language from the manual. This is from page 10. It is essential that the report clearly, completely, and accurately describe the total sequence of events from the point the driver was first observed through the arrest, the chemical test, and subsequent release or incarceration. It's got to be start to finish, complete report from start to finish on this front. There can't be any, getting lazy with it once you've got the person arrested. This has got to be complete, clear, and accurate throughout the officer's interaction with your client. Going over to page 11. Since evidence of a DWI violation is short-lived, police officers need a system and tools for recording field notes at scenes of DWI investigation. Technological advances have made it possible to use audio, video, and digital recorders in the field. They provide an excellent means of documenting this short-lived evidence. However, the vast majority of officers must rely on their own field notes. One way to improve the effectiveness of field notes is to use a structured note-taking guide. This type of form makes it very easy to record brief notes on each step of the detection process and ensures vital evidence is documented. Field notes provide the information necessary for completion of required DWI report forms and assist the officer in preparing a written narrative of investigation. Since they can be used to refresh the officer's memory, field notes could be useful if the officer is required to provide oral testimony. We've likely all seen the little kind of notepads that are designed specifically for field note taking on standardized field sobriety testing. If the officer doesn't have this, then, I've seen officers taking notes on the palm of their hand. I've seen officers taking notes on a scrap piece of paper. But again, what this emphasizes is that having a system for taking field notes is vital. So if you have an officer that, again, suddenly is remembering all these additional details on the stand, did you take field notes in this case? Did you write anything down on scene? No, I didn't write anything down until, 2 hours later when I got back to the station. And then I, typed up the narrative, or I completed a DWIR at that time. Well, aren't you trained to take field notes that are real time on scene to record your findings in terms of what you're seeing during the investigation? They are. Session 12, page 11. A little bit further on in session 12. So this is from page 16. Report writing. So now we're in report writing versus the field notes of page 11. Report writing is an essential skill for a police officer. Good report writing becomes second nature with practice. While there is no one best way to write an arrest report, it is critical the report be detailed regarding every phase of the detection and arrest process. It is helpful to follow a simple format. Departmental policies and/or special instructions or requirements of the prosecutor provide some guidance. So again, importance of these detailed reports. Then it goes into, and this is something you should just kind of take a look at on your own, each kind of phase or stage of the investigation. Phases is actually kind of like a technical term, phase 1, 2, 3. So let's not talk about phase. This is for each stage of the investigation from the time that the officer initially sees. And there's some gold in here. I'm telling you, if you go through and read this, what is required in terms of the officer taking notes, this can really lock them into potentially being able to say, well, again, how are you remembering that now when you were supposed to be writing these things down? So here's one little snippet out of that section. And this is from page 20 of session 12. It says, include specific details about the standardized field sobriety testing clues observed. For example, missed heel to toe on steps 3 and 4 and 5 by at least 3 inches each step, etc. Right. This is something that I think almost all officers fail on, some worse than others. Some just will put down, the total number of clues that they saw. Others will put down, I saw it on this specific step, but very few officers are writing down, that yes, they missed heel to toe, both on the way down and the way back. They missed heel to toe on steps 3, 4, and 5. By at least 3 inches, whatever it might be. There's not that much detail in either the narrative or the DWIR. Then you have officers that really have failed on this front. And, I've seen many, many officers, over the years of practice that are literally typing up their narrative on a Word document that they created. So not using a DWIR, not using some sort of official arrest report or incident detail report. It's just basically Word document. Open up the Word document, type out what I found, boom, send it in. And they miss a lot of stuff because of that, right? Because it's not in this form fillable output where it's kind of like, okay, here's the different stages. Here's the things that I should be notating. I've seen officers that have said, I saw clues on all 3 standardized field sobriety tests, and that's it. They don't even talk about what field sobriety tests they did. The field sobriety tests aren't named. I'm assuming it's the 3 standardized field sobriety tests, but not the specific number of clues. And so now this is where you need to lock that officer in going into it and just say, there's no, you didn't write down any of this. You don't have any field notes that you're trained to take. You didn't take any type of, you didn't write this down in your narrative. And now you want to tell us that you remember seeing 4 out of 6 clues on HGN and these specific 5 clues on the walk and turn. There really is a value to the state in having the ability to refresh the recollection of their officer via field notes. And if they didn't take good field notes, then don't let the state get away with that. Don't let the officer get away with that. They really should not be, as the BLET manual, allowed to testify about something that's not written down. At the end of the day, memory should have served you better at the time that it happened, not 8 months later now when the case is going to trial, or a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, whenever it might be that the case has actually made it to trial. But again, there's all kinds of nuggets like that about each stage of the investigation. So I pulled that out of the SFST stage, but they have what they should be writing down about the initial observations, the driving or physical control, the vehicle stop, contact with driver, exit from vehicle, answers to preliminary questions, SFSTs, other field sobriety tests, arrest, disposition of passengers, disposition location of key and vehicle, witness statements, transportation of defendants. So they're supposed to be taking notes about all of these different things. So again, if they're remembering something specific about one of those stages and they didn't write it down and now it's harmful to your client, you can say, aren't you specifically trained to take notes about that specific stage of the process? So familiarize yourself with that. I'm leaving out a lot of gold nuggets. We'd have to read the whole chapter. I can't do that. It is worth reading the whole chapter. There is a ton of great attack points in session 12, and also an understanding of how the officers are being trained to testify in court if they're paying attention during that training. So final quote here from the NHTSA manual, and then we'll go to the BLET manual. But final quote from the NHTSA manual is from session 12, page 23. The narrative does not necessarily have to be lengthy, but it must be detailed and accurate. Remember, successful prosecution depends on your ability to describe the events you observed. Often a trial can be avoided, i.e., a defendant may plead guilty when you do a thorough job in preparing your arrest report. It's emphasized. I mean, it's emphasized over and over again through session 12 how important detailed and accurate field notes and reports are to the successful prosecution of the case. So again, going over to the BLET manual, again, this is a 12-hour block field note taking and report writing. So I'm just going to read some snippets from here because, again, I just think if you have an officer, let's say that's not NHTSA trained, they don't get away with saying, well, no, I've never been through NHTSA, so I don't know how to take detailed notes or reports, or I haven't been trained on that, whatever it might be. If they've gone through BLET, they've received a lot of training time on field note taking and report writing, or at least they should have. So in the opening statement on page 5 of that section of the BLET manual, the pen is mightier than the sword. Here we go. Sometimes the greatest weapon an officer can have is a pen. Totally agree with that, actually. But so that's right in the manual. Sometimes the greatest weapon an officer can have is a pen. Further down on page 5, the officer may conduct an outstanding investigation, but unless the officer can explain his or her actions and describe the particulars of the event in clear, accurate, and legible writing, no one will ever be aware of how good his or her investigation was. True dat. That's all I can say. True dat. I mean, that's absolutely on point. Again, this is straight out of the BLET manual. Page 6. This is on report writing. Field notes provide the basis for reports. So again, this is emphasizing how important. So hopefully everybody understands the distinction, but let's just review it real quick. Field notes are the notes that the officer is taking in real time during the roadside investigation on a DWI case. The report is written, generally speaking, either at the detention center while the defendant is being processed, or after they're already kind of in the custody of the jail and out of the officer's hands at that point. Then the officer can go back, review all of their field notes, and write the actual full report. So field notes, here on page 6, field notes provide the basis for reports. Your notes are the pieces of a puzzle, and your final report is the complete and accurate picture. That's BLET's language. Your notes, meaning your field notes, your notes are the pieces of a puzzle, and your final report is the complete and accurate picture. So again, importance of not just the final report, but the importance of field notes. So when you have that officer that you get a report back from an officer that looks just like a Word document, ask them when they prepared that report. Did you, prepare that? This looks like something you typed up at a computer. Did you prepare that the same day? Did you prepare it a day later? Aren't you trained to take field notes in real time so that your memory will be sharp and fresh about this? But you're saying that you completed this Word document, 3 days later. Maybe they completed it in response to, another officer saying, "Hey, I need a report on that," which you did. They're supposed to have done field notes. I mean, field notes on scene are supposed to have been completed. Page 10, field notes should be factually accurate, complete, and legible. Again, this is the field notes. This is the roadside investigation writings of the officer. Field notes should be factually accurate, complete, and legible. On page 14, now we're into report writing. Again, I'm skipping through a lot of the BLET section. There's gold nuggets in all of these manuals and every section. We really focus, I think, a lot just on the 3 standardized field sobriety tests. If you go through the training, that's a lot of times what the training blocks are really kind of focused in on, and it's great. There's great ways to attack the field sobriety test, but there's other parts of these manuals that are really just as important, have just as much juice in terms of cross-examination as the sections that focus on just how to accurately do standardized field sobriety testing. So report writing is not a talent. It is a skill. And as with any skill, the ability to perform diminishes without practice. Both manuals emphasize practice, right? Practice, practice, practice. You should be writing these reports on every case, on every charge that the officer does. They should be taking down these field notes. Bottom of page 14. The report contains all of the essential facts so that a party who was not at the scene can understand exactly what happened. Again, that's why these things are so important. It's because you're communicating as the officer potentially to the prosecution, to another officer that was involved, to the defense attorney, to the judge, what happened. And if it's not in there, as the BLET manual says at the end, it didn't happen. Page 15, reports must be factual, clear, concise, complete, and objective. Reports must be factual, clear, concise, complete, and objective. And then the manual goes through each one of those in fine detail, what it means to be factual, clear, concise, complete, and objective. I'm going to skip over to the complete section, and this is explaining what it means, or at least part of the explanation. I'm only reading a portion of what it means for there to be a complete report, but this is from the complete section. If you fail to report things you should, like the source of every fact and observation, you're not going to be able to live with the omissions. So if you fail to report things you should, you're not going to be able to live with the omissions. Either you're going to be repeating, "I don't know," to every other question, or you're going to find yourself on the losing end with a defense attorney when you start testifying to things that aren't in your report. That's it. At least they know. I mean, hey, they know that they should be writing these things down. But that's why. I mean, if you failed to report things that you should have reported, you can't just say, well, now I remember these things. It really undermines the credibility of the person on the stand that is saying that I now have this at my fingertips, a memory of this specific interaction. So again, this is really an important thing to focus in on. We really, before we start diving into the detailed attack on standardized field sobriety testing or what the officer, saw with regard to the vehicle, before you start cross-examining about how the what personal contact clues the officer was seeing, the conversation with your client, before you get into any of that, did you receive BLET training? Did you receive training in standardized field sobriety testing from NHTSA? Were you, during that training, told the importance of taking detailed, accurate, and complete reports? Were you told the importance of taking detailed, accurate, and complete field notes at the roadside? Did you do that? Did you prepare a full report in this case? Did you take detailed field notes in this case? You didn't leave anything out, correct? Because that's what you're trained to do. You didn't leave anything out. Lock the officer into the report. Once they're locked into the report, now you don't have any surprises that are going to come out in testimony. And again, the report may not be in your favor, but at least you know what is going to be said. So make sure that you are locking the officer in early during cross-examination to the report. And I look forward to speaking with you again next time. If you found the information in this podcast to be valuable, I simply ask that you pay it forward and share this podcast with another member of the legal community. Also, if you would leave us a rating or a review on whatever platform you're listening on, I would greatly appreciate it.